This month over at Channel Mum there's been a lot of talk about baby names. Some of our Channel Mum babies have been born this month, and also the UK's list of, I think it's the top 10 girls and boys names has been released. So I thought I'd do a quick video to share with you how we chose our babies' names and what the stories behind the names are. So our first baby is Dylan. He is now 9 years old, and to be perfectly honest, we found it really easy to choose Dylan's name. We didn't find out we were having a boy. We had names in mind for a girl or a boy. There were a couple of alternatives for a boy, but Dylan was the one that we always agreed on, both of us, right from the beginning. As soon as he was born, it really seemed to suit him. Our family liked it. So yeah, it was pretty much going to be Dylan the whole way along. His middle name is Robert, which is after Dan's dad. So it's nice to have a family link in there. So he was named Dylan Robert, and I think it really suits him. In terms of shortenings of the name, I don't like shortening names really. We have a lot of pet names and silly names that we call each other. So at home I will call Dylan Diddles, and I have done since he was really small. Ayden, when he came along, he's only 3, and he's still, from about the age of, well, from as soon as he could talk to still now today, he calls Dylan Dee, and that is stuck, so he gets called Diddles and Dee and Dylan when he's in trouble. Shortly after having Dylan, my daughter came along. There's only 15 months between them, so we still had a lot of the possible girls' names, had Dylan been a girl, fresh in our minds. My daughter's name is quite unusual. It's Maren, which is spelled M-E-R-Y-N. Years and years ago, before we even had kids, we saw a film. It's a Jack Nicholson film, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called now, which is really annoying. If I remember, I'll pop it in the link below. But there's a girl in the movie, and her name, or so we thought, was Maren. Now, I just loved it as soon as I heard it, and Dan did too, and it just stuck with us for years. Turns out that her name, from looking at the credits, wasn't actually Maren, it was Maren, M-A-R-I-N, but with the American accent it sounded like Maren, so I preferred Maren to Maren, so that's what we had in our mind. There were a few other alternatives, but no matter which name, and it literally did take us 6 weeks to make a final decision. We were right to the wire on the registration date before I finally made up my mind to go with Maren. My husband, he knew right from the beginning that that was her name, that's what he wanted her name to be, so he didn't need any convincing, it was just me. And eventually, I think we called her Imogen for a week, and then there was, what other names did we have? Isla, which I still love. There were a few, but eventually we decided on Maren. Her middle name actually was one of our possible first name choices for her, and that's Ava. There's no family link or any particular meaning behind it. It's just I always really liked the name. I thought it was really pretty, so it's Maren Ava. Similar to Dylan, Ayden, when he was very little and couldn't say their names properly, decided to call Maren Mimi. So Maren has a ton of names that she gets called around the house, mostly made up by me. Mimi comes from Ayden. I call her Mimi, Mima, Mimu, Mima Limu, Lima, Limu. The list goes on. I just call her a whole random list of names, and she answers to them all, which is brilliant. I don't know where they come from. We're just full of, we've all got silly names for each other in this house. It's just the way we are, and Maren seems to have most of them. Ayden came along quite a few years later, and again, we didn't find out what we were having again. We didn't know if it was a girl or a boy, so we had a few different options. Dylan and Maren's names both have a Y in them, so I always had at the back of my mind that I would like to have had a Y in there somewhere. If there had been another name I'd liked and it didn't have a Y in, it wouldn't have really mattered, but I just, for like symmetry's sake, I quite like the idea of having a Y. My husband was really keen to call him Hayden, with a H. That is actually my grandfather's name, or was my grandfather's name, and I like the name, but to me it was a much older man's name because of my grandfather, and I still think the name is lovely, but personally for me I associated it with an older man, so I found it difficult to imagine calling a baby Hayden. However, I really like the name Ayden, so we kind of reached a compromise on that, and pretty much all the way along we knew it would be Ayden. Again, when he was born, it wasn't like an instant yes, he's Ayden. It took me a couple of weeks to make my final decision. I think there's something such a huge responsibility choosing a name that I always procrastinate over it and sort of talk myself in and out of it, but pretty much all along it was going to be Ayden. Ayden's middle name is Byron, which is after my dad. Again, I would love to have called him Byron, but to me, it was such a strong association with my dad that I just felt more comfortable using it as a middle name, so he's Ayden Byron. Ayden hasn't really developed any nicknames yet that we've kind of given him. He gets called Tiny, Tiddler, because he's the baby. And they all call him the baby sometimes, which is a bit bizarre, but he answers to that. A good friend of mine calls him A-Dog or A-Dizzle, or A-Bizzle, which I think is hilarious. But no, he hasn't really got nicknames yet, but I think he'll probably be called Tiny and Tiddler for a long time. He seems to like it. I tend to call him Bubba, but then I call them all Bubba or Bubs, and they all respond to me calling them that. Yeah, we're a family of lots of silly names. One day maybe I'll tell you what mine and Dan's pet names are for each other, but that's a whole other video. We always look into the meanings of names when we're deciding on our baby's names, and Dylan means God of the Sea, which my husband loves the sea, so he thought that was really cool, and we live by the sea, so it just seemed like a nice fit. And I don't think the meaning of the name would ever really influence my decision, but it's nice if what it means something to you. The Latin meaning of the name Maren is actually of the sea, which is the biggest coincidence. We had no idea before we chose it, and when we were looking up the meaning, it just made it feel right, that Dylan means God of the sea and Maren means of the sea. Somewhere I'm sure I saw that it meant goddess of the sea as well, which is just such a coincidence because it wasn't intended for them to match in that way. We decided to spell Ayden with a Y because of the Y thing I mentioned earlier, and it just made it that little bit different, and I actually prefer the way it looks written down with an AY, so Ayden. And his name means little fire. He is a fire sign. He's an Aries like me, he's a fire sign, and it just suits him. He is a little ball of energy, and he is a little fiery little dude, and I just think the name really suits him. So those are our 3 baby names, the reasons we chose them and the meanings behind them. Don't forget to check out the Channel Mum site. I'll pop a link below where all the other mummy vloggers are talking about their babies' names. How did you choose your babies' names? I'd love to know. I love hearing about these things, so please leave me a comment below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you did. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one.